We learn from elders. We learn from survival. We learned from each other. For trans guys. Wisdom you can feel. Real talk. Collective care. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to For Trans Guys. Happy third episode, and we're now available on all of the podcast formats. My name is Megan Rohrer.
I'm JJ.
I'm Zander.
And we're still working on that part. We agreed on the order and did not do it right.
I didn't even hear the order. Oh, my God.
Well, I'm so glad that we're all here together. This has just been such a pleasure to spend time with you all. And I'm so grateful for our listeners to be participating with us. And we are looking for our fourth person to be joining us. So watch for future episodes and you'll be hearing us talk to some really cool people. So we're first going to figure out, how do we find ourselves? How did we get here? Well, for me, I think one of the things that I started to really realize becoming a trans man and living into that part of myself was I found experiences that other people were having. That seems kind of like a no-brainer, but for me specifically, it was the way they were achieving their lives. So it wasn't so much about being trans. It was more about like who they are in the world. And a couple examples of this, I lead a walking tour, which is why I'm wearing my Liberate Compton's walking tour t-shirt. I lead some transgender district walking tours in San Francisco, and it's based on this book, which is the San Francisco Transgender District, the history of, and I'm going to read just a couple of little blurbs. One is about Lou Sullivan, who, when I learned about Lou, I didn't know about Lou until I got here to San Francisco. When I learned about Lou, I really appreciated the correspondence that Lou did. The ability to reach out and connect with people is something that resonated with me as a human being. I love being a peer supporter. I love connecting with people. And I felt that the authenticity of who I am came through in Lou's experience in his letters and explaining, the kind of tea he was taking and what he was doing. And back in the day before we had internet and all the things, we wrote letters. And I remember doing that as a kiddo, writing letters and having pen pals and just having really incredible, meaningful conversations. And they're all in the GLBT Historical Society that Lou was a founding member of. And it's really fascinating, that connection. And he also, participated in the Guy Girl Gateway group and was a leader in that as well. So I think, the paths of Lou was a big part of that. And then the other part of that is Reed Erickson, who founded, not only a trans man himself, took some funds that his father had a smelt plant, or a couple of them in Louisiana, closed them down after he died, several years after he died, started with $5 million from those two smelt plants, and then grew it into $40 million. And this is like around the late 60s, which is pretty profound. And so here's this philanthropic guy who really put back into his community and did a lot of incredible fundraising for all type of events and spaces, particularly peer spaces and community spaces, and ways for not only the work, like, Lou did some work on the DSM and trying to make some of the changes from the DSM. Both of them worked with Harry Benjamin and, had some work with him. And it's just, I like the fact that here's somebody who takes their own wealth and reinvests it into community. And that was another thing that really resonated with me, is just every effort that I can put back into community, into amplifying trans lives, really was important to me. So the more I discovered those attributes of myself, the more I found me as a trans man. And so I think for, like I mentioned before, being embodied is a really big part of who I am. And when those aspects of myself resonate within my body, I feel more trans. I feel more of a masculine person. I feel more myself and authentic. And so that's really how I found myself, was sort of haphazardly through these values and experiences of other stories that resonated with me. I felt it within my body, and I live that more authentically now. So, that's my pitch to y'all. Zander, I wonder if you've got any thoughts, or if any of that resonated with me, or if you knew some of these folks back in the day and can tell some stories. All the above.
Well, I never got an opportunity to meet Lou Sullivan or Reed Erickson. I wished I had, but like you, they were influential in how I got here. So how I got here was in the summer of 1995. I went to a gay and lesbian film festival in San Diego, California, and I watched a movie called You Don't Know Dick. And that movie was the first feature-length film or documentary that focused on FTMs, what we used to call ourselves, meaning female to male, transsexual, which actually Lou Sullivan had a part in coming up with that language, because prior to Lou Sullivan working on that, we were called female transsexuals. And he said, we're not female transsexuals, we're female to male, short FTM. And so I was like, well, that's really interesting. At the time, I was just a big old dyke and fascinated by this idea that people were transitioning, but it didn't really go into a lot of details about the medical transition process. It was just showing trans men's lives. Then about a year later, I was in college in Denver, Colorado. I was a non-traditional student. I was already 30 years old, something like that. Yeah, 1996, so I was 30. And a friend of mine called me up and said, you've got to see this new book that just came out. And it was called Body Alchemy. And the author, not the author, but well, I guess we'll just say the author, was Lauren Cameron, another trans man of that same kind of era of the Jameson Green, Maxwell Valerio era. They were all, I don't know if they were all friends, but they were all part of going to the FTMI group that Lou Sullivan started. And so I was looking through this book with my friend, who subsequently also transitioned, but years after I did it. And it was a picture book. Lauren Cameron was a photographer, and he took photographs of himself, but also other trans men. And then I was like, wait a minute, I recognize some of these guys from that movie, You Don't Know Dick. And then it showed like before and after pictures, so to speak, like before they transitioned. And then, years into their transition, I was like, oh, okay, now I see what they've done. These people were lesbians or dykes. They were masculine women, and they started taking testosterone and became much more masculine looking, right? Looking more like a man than a masculine woman. But after seeing that movie and looking at that book, I understood it. But at the time, it wasn't something that I thought, oh, I'm going to do that. It didn't even really dawn on me. I was just happy to learn about it. In college, I worked at what was called the GLBT Student Services, the gay, lesbian, bi, not bisexual, and trans, not transsexual, not transgender, right? So this is sort of ahead of its time in 1996 in Denver, Colorado, the GLBT Student Services Center. And it was while I was there as a work study for 3 years that I was able to do all kinds of things. And one of the things that we were doing through that office was organizing the GLBT Awareness Month, which then was in October, because October was when National Coming Out Day happened. And so we built a lot of different programming around the month of October. We couldn't do it in June because that was Pride Month, but most people weren't in school then. And we didn't have things like Day of Remembrance or Trans Day of Visibility, right? So we went with National Coming Out Day and then built around that and put all kinds of trans things in. And so I met a whole lot of trans people that are fairly famous for doing a lot of different things, being in movies, writing books. And when I went off to graduate school in the year 2000, I focused a lot of not my studies, of course, but my papers that I was writing, the group projects that I was working on trans men, on FTMs. And that's when I went on the website for the FTM International, Female to Male International. Again, this is 2000. The internet was in its infancy as far as the World Wide Web and being able to have access to websites and web pages. But FTMI did have a web page in 2000, and that's when I learned more about Jameson Green, because like I said, he was in the You Don't Know Dick movie, and he was also featured in the Body Alchemy book. And I was able to make contact with some members of FTM International at the time And then I moved to the Bay Area, to Berkeley, to go to seminary, which is where Megan and I met at Pacific School of Religion. And I had the opportunity there to meet Lauren Cameron because he lived close to campus and used to walk his little dog on campus there at PSR. And so I walked up to him one day and I was like, "Are you Lauren Cameron?" He's like, "Yes." And so we, became chatty. We were never friends, but I saw him on a regular basis, always said hello to him. He was quite maybe shy. He was kind of a shy guy. And so Lou Sullivan founded FTM San Francisco, which became FTM International while Jameson Green was the president. Jameson Green took over as one of the leaders, not the leader, but one of the leaders after Lou died, I believe in 1991, complications related to having AIDS. And interestingly enough, because I was living in the Bay Area when I started my transition in 2005, I had an occasion to run into Jameson Green at a meeting for the wording that goes on a plaque about the Compton cafeteria riots that happened in the summer of 1966, the summer that I was born. And so I walked with Jameson Green back to the BART station, or the subway station, for those of you who aren't familiar with the San Francisco subway system. And I asked him if he would be my mentor, and thankfully he said yes. And to this day, I just had breakfast with him last Friday. He is still my mentor. He's my friend. We've collaborated on many, many projects. He contributed to Letters from My Brothers and Manifest, two of the books that Megan and I worked on. So that's how I got here. It was through learning about other trans men's lives, their journeys, their experiences, and then meeting them. And then I became a board member of FTM International, and I co-facilitated the FTM discussion group in San Francisco that Lou started and that Jameson ran for a number of years. So it's like this really nice, lineage or legacy of being involved in that organization and that group. I left FTM International and formed with 3 other trans men in the San Francisco area, the Lou Sullivan Society. And we were able to, I don't know, what would be the right word? Not chronicle, but collect, information and history about Lou Sullivan and make it available. And also to continue that support group, because FTM International pulled out of the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's through meeting people, learning about their lives, and then getting involved and being part of the history. So yeah, it's been really wonderful. And people should definitely look up about Lou Sullivan and Reed Erickson. There's also Max Wolf Valeria, who wrote the Testosterone Files, Jameson Green, who wrote Becoming a Visible Man, just really great stories. And Jameson Green and Max Valeria are still around, right there. And Jude Patton, who's in his 80s now, who lives up in Sacramento, California, like remarkable guys who have done amazing things. And there's a lot more. We need more mentorship in our community. And that's, well, I'll stop right there because I could go on and on about mentorship. So Megan, how about you? How did you get here?
Well, I sort of started my trans journey, I think maybe in high school orchestra, because I played the concert harp in South Dakota. I didn't have to wear a dress. I could wear a tie and pants, which was not what female body people were allowed to do. When I was in college, pretty shortly after Matthew Shepard died in the 90s, for those who don't know, Matthew Shepard was a gay man who was killed and hung on a fence post in Wyoming, and the fence post looked a lot like a cross. And so some people who were open to LGBT people thought that he was sort of like a martyr for the community, and other people felt like it was God sending a signal that the community should not exist at all. And so it created this very hot button debate. And what that meant for me, because I was one of my closest friends in college was a special education major, is that I just figured I should just learn how to communicate all of the ways that like God and I are good, we're okay, like it's fine. How can I like communicate that better? I just thought if I can communicate better, then people will get it and they won't think that any of this is unusual. And so part of what I did, which is super normal, is I created a club, a gay straight student alliance through an organization known as GLSEN for like younger students in South Dakota. And I was the president of the college's Out with an exclamation point club. So just trying to like have an open space. I like led a film festival because back then Blockbuster was like one of the only places you could get videos, and they would intentionally cut out all of the LGBT content from movies. And so the only ways that you could get movies and share them is if you like purchase them yourself. I was a poor college student, so I would like buy used VHS tapes on eBay, and then we would like show them in the big college like science lecture halls, and everybody from the whole city of Sioux Falls that was LGBT could come and like watch the film for free. Through that sort of process of like learning how to better kind of communicate, at the time I was like in the lesbian community because it didn't really feel like being trans was a thing that people could do. I moved to Berkeley to get my master's degree, was hanging out with Zander and got to see how cute Lauren Cameron's dog was. But I really thought like Lauren Cameron, you got to check out from Body Alchemy, was ripped, like gym ripped. And I was like, I don't think I can do that. I was a little more growing up in the Oprah years where you like love yourself and know that like maybe the dieting harshly isn't going to go well and you're still going to have your tummy. And so I was like, I can't be a trans man because I don't want to be ripped like in the gym. And so I sort of used some of the other terms that were around during that time, like genderqueer. Also going on with me was like, I knew I wanted to have kids. And at the time, there weren't a lot of fertility options if you were going to have a trans journey. And so a lot of people had to choose. This is still back when therapists would tell people, you have to disown your entire family if you're going to be trans medically, because we won't approve you if you're going to try to continue to like be relating with your family. They really believed it was psychologically better to cut off all ties to every single human being you knew pre-transition. That's not the way things happen anymore. But I was like, I like my family. I want to keep them. I like my community. I want to be a part of it. Like, I'm not ashamed of any of this stuff. So maybe if I like communicate better, things will get better. And so I just sort of like dealt with my inner uncomfortability and sort of lived within what was possible given the insurance I had. And as someone who was working with the homeless and hungry, I didn't have enough disposable income at the time to like fly to another country in order to get those services. At the time, my healthcare, in like the 2001s, my healthcare had a panel mostly made of trans women. And that panel of people would decide, in addition to your therapist and your doctor, if you actually were trans. And if they decided you weren't trans based on what their sort of vision at that time was, then you didn't have access to any like medical care. And I sort of knew from certain circles some of the people that were on that committee, and I knew other trans men who had to fight for like years to just be approved to be able to get their medical transition. I was like, I don't really want to do that. I'm going to just like feed the homeless, and once you all figure it out a better process, maybe I'll do it. I also grew up in the 80s, back before they had those little like that information on milk that said it was hormone free. And so every single female bodied person that grew up with me in my high school needed to have breast reduction surgery. And so for about 10 years, I was medically approved for breast reduction surgery, but I didn't choose to have it because I had only two options with the surgeons that my insurance would provide. They would do the trans surgery for me, but they said Ken or Barbie. And again, I didn't want to be ripped. And I didn't want, literally, this was what they told me, my nipple 12 inches from my clavicle as a female, right? And so feeling like there weren't a lot of like body friendly versions of navigating kind of trans science at the time, I delayed it a lot longer than I wish I would have in retrospect. I ended up having the surgery just because the pain that I had in my back and my neck got so overwhelming. I just finally chose, and I chose the one that would make me feel much more comfortable in the world. At the time, it was like choosing to not have as much sexual harassment choice. because of how often people would talk about my breasts or touch them when I didn't want them to, or say things about it. Grateful for that choice in every way, shape, and form, because it was obviously the right choice for me. And then I made other sort of hormone choices once I had kids and was comfortable with some of those fertility options going away. And so it was a much longer journey, still is a longer journey of figuring out who I am and how I want to describe it to the world. There are some things I feel about myself that I might not want my work colleagues to call me. And so that is sort of like a journey that I think is also ongoing. But you know what? I also want to know how our listeners would answer this question. If there are parts of your story that you're comfortable sharing publicly, feel free to put it in the comments. Also, if you go to transitionalwisdom.net, you can fill out the comment box and you can send it to us, and we can respond to you via email. Or if you think, you know what, you guys need a fourth trans guy, why don't you have a fourth trans guy? It's called Four Trans Guys. We are actively inviting folk to come and be our guest trans guide, have conversations with us. It's going to rotate through our conversations so that we can hear a diversity of opinions. And if you think, hey, I should do that, then you can head on over to transwisdom.net and sign up to be a part of that.
If you go to Viator, which is the fancy place where everybody goes to go and select for walking tours or any kind of tours or adventures, you can find us on there, Viator.com. There's the plug. Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, you can also get the book, which is really very cool too. You can find this on Amazon. It's put out by Arcadia Press. The book is really great because it has a lot of addresses where you can do your own kind of walking tour and look around and see those places. A lot of it's in the Tenderloin. So it's sometimes fun to have a guide to walk through and navigate some of the Tenderloin spaces, because the transgender cultural district is about 3 blocks of the Tenderloin overall. So yeah, I would love to have people come, especially if you're traveling for Pride in June. We're doing several versions of the walking tour. You can probably find some versions of that out there. But if you'd like to have a private tour for you and your family, check us out on Viator.
I'm really looking forward to seeing who is going to come on the show, though. So I hope people do go to the website, the transitionalwisdom.net website. And if you haven't seen our first and second episode, you can see it there. And then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the form you can fill out to let us know who you are and get on the show.
That's right. So take a second if you haven't done yet, and like and subscribe and do all of those things that people do when they view podcasts. If there are other folk you think, hey, you guys should be listening to this too, forward it along to them. And take care until we chat again next time.